Most podcasts are dead. Remember, nearly half of them never make it past episode 3. The graveyard is massive. The competition is small. The one number that you should be looking at, the only number that you really should be looking at instead of downloads, is engagement. How much of an episode are people actually listening to? Give people something to do next. One clear call to action every single episode. Make it easy for that one right listener to take the next step. Somewhere out there right now, there's a business owner looking at the podcast stats, and the screen says something like 43 downloads. And they're thinking, my podcast is a big fat failure. Nobody's listening. Why am I even doing this? If that's you, then this episode is for you, because I'm going to say something that goes against everything the internet has told you before about podcasting. Your podcast is probably not failing. You're just measuring it like it's a radio station when it's actually a sales tool. 43 downloads sounds tiny, right? Okay, now imagine I told you tomorrow morning, 43 of your potential clients are going to sit in a room and they're going to listen to you uninterrupted for 20 minutes. No competitors, no distractions. They chose to be there. Would you call that a failure? You'd call that the best sales meeting of your year. That's what a podcast is. And today, I'm going to break down the download myth, why small audiences are not just fine for a business podcast, but sometimes actually better, what the research says about who's listening and how much they trust you, and the one question that matters more than how many downloads did I get. I'm Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. I've made over 1,000 podcast episodes, worked with more than 100 clients from all around the world through 7 Million Bikes podcasts, and this is Smarter Podcasting. Let's bust this myth right now. So first, let's be fair about where this myth comes from. Because it's not stupid, it comes from how everybody else makes money in media. YouTube pays on views. Instagram rewards reach. TV sells ads on ratings. Everywhere you look, the message is the same. Bigger audience equals more money. So people start a podcast and then they bring that mass with them. They see 50 downloads and they compare it to influencers with 50,000 and then they feel like a joke. But here's what they're missing. That maths is sponsorship maths. It only applies if you plan to sell ads on your show. And if you've listened to me before, you'll know that what my take is on that. If you're getting into podcasting to make money, then just stop right now. That's a game for the 1% of mega shows, and honestly, even a lot of them struggle. A business podcast runs on completely different maths. Sponsor math says, I need 100,000 listeners so a brand pays me a few $1,000s. Business math says, I need one listener to become a client. Think about what one client is actually worth to you. If you're an accountant, a consultant, an agency, a lawyer, one new client might be worth $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 or more over a couple of years. One client can pay for your entire podcast, the equipment, the production, everything, many, many times over. So which would you rather have? 100,000 random listeners who will never buy anything from you, or 200 listeners where a decent chunk of them are exactly the people who might hire you? I know which one I'd take every single time. And while we're busting myths, let me take down this one's ugly cousin, because they usually travel together. Isn't podcasting oversaturated? There are millions of podcasts. Why would anyone listen to mine? Okay, think about how many new shows come out on Netflix, on Hulu, Amazon, the BBC, all of it. There is an endless flood of new television every single week. And I have never, not once in my life, heard a single person say, you know what, there's too many TV shows these days, they should stop making them. Nobody says that because nobody believes it and nobody expects every TV show to be for everyone. A show finds its audience, and that's enough. But podcasting, suddenly 4 million registered podcasts means it's too crowded. Here's what the number actually hides. Only a fraction of those 4 million shows are actually even active. Most podcasts are dead. Remember, nearly half of them never make it past episode 3. The graveyard is massive. The competition is small. And now add the business angle. How many of those active shows are in your niche, for your market, talking to your potential clients? For most businesses I talk to, the honest answer is almost none. You're not entering a crowded market. You're often entering an empty one. Saturated is the wrong word for podcasting. Podcasting has barely even started, and the space where you should be podcasting is probably wide open. Now, let's talk about who those actual listeners are, because this is where it gets really interesting for a business. According to a study by our friends at Lower Street Media, 83% of senior executives listen to podcasts weekly. 83%. These are the decision makers. These are the people who sign contracts, approve budgets, and hire agencies. They're not scrolling past you on Instagram for half a second. They're listening to podcasts on the commute, at the gym, walking the dog. And the trust numbers are even better. Research on B2B podcasting found that 68% of listeners say they trust companies featured on podcasts more than the companies they see in regular ads. A stranger listens to 3 or 4 of your episodes. That's over an hour of you in their ears explaining how you think that you can solve their problems, how you treat people, how you sound. No ad can do that. No LinkedIn post can do that. By the time that person books a call with you, they're not a cold lead. They already know you intimately, like they know you in a way that nobody else does. And podcast listeners actually stick around. That's the other thing. A decent show keeps people listening most of the way through an episode. And the research also shows that listeners hold attention through podcasts far better than they do through video content, where most people, let's be honest, are gone within a couple of minutes or already looking for the next video. 20 minutes of someone's genuine attention is the rarest thing in marketing right now, and podcasts still get it. And look, I'm not just telling you a theory here. Let me give you a real example from my own podcast. My first show, the one I started back in 2019, has never had a massive audience. It's done well, it's won awards, and it's actually in the top 5% of podcasts worldwide. But we're not talking Joe Rogan numbers, not even close. At one point, I sat down and I did a deep dive on who was actually listening. Not how many, who. And we worked out the audience was mostly overseas, mostly 25 to 34, connected to Vietnam in some way, and mostly listening on iPhones, which tells you something about their spending power, right? So I wrote down the kind of brands that would fit that customer. Schools, travel companies, hotels, and finance. I set that intention and we just kept publishing. And then, one day, a message arrives on TikTok. A finance company, one of the exact categories on my list. They'd never even heard the podcast. They just saw one of the short clips that we posted, went through our content and decided that this was a brand they wanted to partner with. That partnership turned into actual money in the bank. And here's the point. That didn't happen because the audience was big. It happened because the audience was right. A small, well-defined audience with the right people is worth more than a huge audience of nobody in particular. There's no such thing as luck in this, by the way. I know it sounds like luck sometimes, but it's really not. It's knowing exactly who you're talking to and putting the work out consistently and letting the right people find it. That's a system. It just looks like luck from the outside. So, if downloads aren't the measure, what is? Here's the question I want you to ask instead. Not how many people listened, but is my podcast starting conversations with the right people? That looks like a prospect mentioned your episode on a sales call. A guest you wanted to meet says yes to coming on, and then stays in touch after. Someone emails you a question because of something that you said on the podcast. Or a client tells you, oh, I listened to a few episodes before I booked the call. That's your podcast working. None of that shows up in your download numbers, not one bit of it. I've seen shows with tiny audiences quietly driving real business, and I've seen shows with big download numbers that have never produced a single client. Guess which host is happier? Your podcast isn't failing because the number is small. It's only failing if the wrong people are listening, or if you've given the right people nothing to do next. And that second part matters. Give people something to do next. One clear call to action every single episode. Make it easy for that one right listener to take the next step. Now, if you do want one number to look at, because I know some of you need a number, don't look at downloads. Look at engagement. How much of each episode are people actually listening to? And if you can't remember, go to Apple Podcast Connect and then go to also Spotify for podcasters, and you can find the numbers in there. And they only show the number for that platform, but it will give you a good indication. 1,000 downloads where everybody leaves after 90 seconds is a show with a problem. 100 downloads where everyone stays to the end, or most people stay to the end, that's a show that's working. It just needs more of the right people to find it. Those are completely different problems with completely different fixes. Downloads can't tell you which one you have. Engagement can. And one bonus tip while you're still here, look at where your listeners are and what they listen on. When I did my own deep dive, the fact that most of my listeners were on iPhones told me something about who they were. Your stats are full of clues about who your one listener actually is. Most people never look past the big vanity number on the front page. So let's recap. The download myth comes from sponsor maths. And unless you're trying to be a media empire, sponsor maths is not your maths. The market isn't oversaturated either. Nobody complains that there are too many TV shows. And most of those 4 million podcasts are dead anyway. Business maths says one right listener can pay for everything. The decision makers are already listening. 83% of senior executives weekly and listeners trust companies they hear on podcasts far more than companies they see in ads. My own sponsor found me through a small, focused show. And the real measure of your podcast isn't downloads. It's whether it's starting conversations with the right people. So if your stat screen says that there's 43 downloads this week, don't you dare quit. 43 people chose to spend time with you. Talk to them like they matter, because some of them are your next clients. And if you want help making a podcast that's actually built around that, built to reach the right people instead of chasing big numbers, that's what we do at 7 Million Bikes Podcasts. Go to 7millionbikes.com, click Talk to Neil, that's me, and book a call. No obligations, just an honest conversation. And do me a favor, share this episode with a business owner who's been too embarrassed by their numbers to keep going. They need to hear it. Thanks for listening. I'm Neil Mackay, the podcast guy, and this is Smarter Podcasting. Cheers.